now on our way to the Kennedy Space Center, driving from Orlando. NASA's famous launch headquarters is just a 45-minute drive east of Orlando. The Kennedy Space Center was a full day's experience. Atlantis Area 5. An island 6 times the size of Manhattan, Kennedy Space Center is a place of discovery where history-making technology works in balance with the unique Florida nature. Bordered by the Atlantic Ocean and the Intercoastal Waterway, Kennedy Space Center is home to thousands of alligators, birds and other animals, species in the surrounding wildlife habitat, all just steps away from the busiest launch pad in the world, the Space Shuttle landing strip and the massive vehicle assembly building.
Now the transportation system runs continuously out to the restricted areas of this huge place we call Kennedy Space Center. We'll stop at 3 different destinations. First is the Launch Complex 39 Observation Gantry for an up-close look at what it takes to launch and land the space shuttle. At our second destination, you'll relive the era of the moon missions, which all began right here nearly 30 years ago. The Apollo Saturn V Center is the largest and most popular destination here at Kennedy Space Center. From there, you take a giant leap forward into the future at the International Space Station Center, where you see life-size mock-ups of this orbiting research laboratory. This adventure lets you experience space at your own pace. Buses depart from each destination at regular intervals to keep lines and waiting to a minimum. Remember to glance up when you hear this tone to get an insider's view of the buildings and sights you'll see along the way. I'll join you again with more exploring tips at our next stop, the new Launch Complex 39 Observation.
Honeycomb of work platforms stacked 5 stories high. Technicians use the platforms to reach, maintain, and inspect the various systems that make the orbiter the most complex machine. How do you move 11 million pounds of shuttle and platform to the launch pad?
About 6 million pounds unloaded and has a surface area about the size of a baseball diamond. A single cleat off its tracks weighs a ton. 2 large diesel engines generate electrical power for the motors that turn its treads. Operating a vehicle of this size takes a highly trained crew of about 20 engineers and technicians.
Driver's Shuttle is one of 3 mobile launch platforms. The platforms rest on pedestals over 20 foot above the ground so the crawler transporter can drive under, raise them, and transport them. The platforms have 3 openings through the center of them. They use as flame chutes for shuttle liftoff, 2 large rectangular openings for the flames of the solid rocket boosters to pass through, and 1 large square one for the flames of the shuttle's 3 engines to pass through.
Kennedy Space Center oversees the launch until the moment the shuttle clears the tower, about 7 seconds after liftoff. At that time, responsibility transfers to Mission Control at Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, going down more than 7 feet deep.
There are 2 crawler transporters here at Kennedy Space Center. They are both more than 30 years old, and they've wrapped up.
Floating weightless in our fragile spacecraft, looking up into a vast sea of stars, it's impossible not to feel humbled by your surroundings, and incredibly grateful to the people back on Earth who make the shuttle fly. Hi, I'm Marcia Ivins, and welcome to Launch Complex 39 at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. This is where it all starts, and what and who makes it happen is what this film is all about. To tell the shuttle story, you'd probably think we'd start with a dramatic liftoff, like this. Complete our mission in space, and land on the runway back at the Kennedy Space Center a couple of weeks later. You might think that, but you'd have it all backwards. The real shuttle story happens between landing and launch. The real heroes are the people on the ground who put their hearts and souls into their jobs so that we can go to places like this and beyond. Without their dedication and attention to detail, the shuttle would never get off the ground. And when you're working in space, hundreds of miles above the planet, you never forget the thousands of hours the Kennedy Space Center ground crew puts in before the flight. As we make our re-entry, the shuttle team ground crew is back at the runway ready and waiting.
I, as a NASA convoy commander, lead an assortment of about 50 vehicles out to the runway, and we'll wait for the orbiter to touch down, extract chute to deploy, and it comes to a stop. At that time, the convoy will roll out to the vehicle. We'll descend upon it with our 50 vehicles. We'll check on the crew, make sure the crew can get out. We make sure that there's no leaking chemicals, toxic chemicals or vapors coming from the vehicle. We get it stabilized and put to bed, if you would, in the OPF at the end of the day.
In the orbiter processing facility, shuttle team workers will spend the next 4 to 6 months inspecting every inch of the orbiter for damage that may have occurred during the previous flight, making repairs, and getting the shuttle ready for its next mission.
Built by Kennedy Space Center engineers, provide workers access to the shuttle while protecting it from contamination and damaging weather.
We're now looking at Launch Pad 39A, which is an active launch site where the shuttle is launched from.
No, they even said that a lot of
Imagination, and no problem ever stood in their way for long. You know, in the end, when we actually did send men into space, it turned out that those were exactly the qualities it took.
I'm John Hudson. This is Pad 39 of the Kennedy Space Center. I was a launch controller here when from this very spot, man took off to fly to the moon. It was a journey that began 12 years before that rocket ever left the ground. And it started on the other side of the world.
Back then, we were one of two superpowers that always seemed to be on the edge of a terrible war.
In one big leap. And we were doing it with a rocket that no man had ever flown before.
They sat on the pad. She was the first of a new kind, a moon rocket. This was the Phoenix, risen from the ashes of Apollo 1. The first Apollo crew did not die in vain. This was to be their testament. about to leave his planet behind and journey to another. It is one of those rare moments when history is not being made, destiny is being embraced.
DSS verify go to launch. The DSC verify go to launch. SRO verify go to launch. Element verify go to launch. DLO verify go to launch. CCAFS guidance.
Attention all personnel. The countdown clock will start on my mark at T-minus 3 minutes. 3, 2, 1.
This is launch control. T-minus 3 minutes and counting. We've completed our communications checks with the Apollo 8 astronauts in the cabin, and the communications are go. During this period, once we do get the firing command, the various tanks within the 3 stages of Saturn V launch vehicle begin to pressurize.
Millions of people all over the world held their breath while a single man put his foot onto the moon's surface. It was a journey that began just a short distance from where the Apollo Saturn V centre stands today. For those who remember, the event remains in their minds as those footprints remain in the lunar soil. Here along the tour route, it returns spectacularly to life, from go fever to the thunderous launches and the mission dangers. The moon landing still raises goosebumps over 30 years later. Here guests come face to face with the huge Saturn V rocket from the Apollo moon missions.
It was a moment shared by an entire world.
Dear man from the planet Earth, first set foot upon the moon. It came indeed for all mankind.
With these first steps, mankind stood on the highest ground, and we saw our planet as our home port in the endless ocean of space.
there was something which was surprising to me. It occurred as I was standing on the surface. Just after we had landed, I'd gone down, standing on the surface and looking at planet Earth for the first time, seeing the beauty, seeing the finiteness of it, the limits of it, realizing what a shame it was that people were confronting each other on that planet without realizing what totally unexpected for an engineer and fighter pilot to be crying quietly up there on the moon.
The first mission had stayed for only one day, but over the next 3.5 years, 5 more Apollo missions visited the moon, and with each one, we stayed longer, roamed further, and discovered more.
I never thought when I was a kid building rockets, in high school, that we would go to the moon, before the end of the century. I mean, I thought that was something that was way in the future, fantasy.
I was strolling on the moon one day in a very month of December. Hey, look at the size of that rock. That is the best example we got. Just don't stub your toe.
We have got to understand that as a people, we need to stretch. We need to reach beyond our grasp. We need to strive to do things that seem impossible, because in the accomplishment of them, we move society forward.
I would explore, I'd look for everything. I would try to start a farm. Find alternate energy sources. You may be able to cure certain diseases. I want to go up on Mars and dance on it.
Play basketball, but you can still be short, because then you could fly up in the air.
Baseball would be awesome.
Hit the ball, you get a home run every time.
There are a lot of things that could benefit mankind that we, because of science, we simply cannot do.
The Shuttle Landing Facility has several systems, including a microwave scanning beam and some visual aids like red and white lights that, when properly lined up, indicate the correct glide slope.
The orbiter approaches the runway at a very steep angle, about 6 times steeper than a typical commercial jet. Then, just before it touches down, it flares for landing.
The remaining area, over 130,000 acres, is part of the Marathon.
Payloads in Harbor Bay.
Yeah, so it has assays.
Thanks for a great job and a fantastic 2 weeks of microgravity research.
Yeah. As you have seen, Space Shuttle Explorer is very much like an actual working.
Did you see us stand here?
I heard your voice.
Way back.
is coming home. Commander has to make a perfect landing now. He has no engines to take him around again. From the orbiter and the possible use of an escape basket. Earth in all its splendor. The Eaglevp satellite weighs 10 tons and is the size of a school bus. It carries 57 experiments, the work of more than 200 scientists from 8 countries. Eaglevp will stay up here for more than a year, exposing various materials to the vacuum of space. The typical crew consists of 5 to 7 people. Some are career astronauts, others are specialists in a variety of fields, representing various countries. Above is the flight deck with windows facing up and back into the payload bay. Below, the mid-deck functions as living room, dining room, bedroom, workshop, and study.
1,000 years ago, Polynesian navigators explored the Pacific Ocean by the star.